The future of conversation is visible, seamlessly blending responsive voice and rich visuals to envelop customers in high-touch and truly immersive luxury experience.
You saw took really center stage throughout 25. I really think multimodality and inputs and outputs are really going to drive what you see for businesses in 26. The fidelity of data that you have and that you have available to you is going to drive the fidelity and the accuracy of whatever solution you're putting into the market. The SaaS business model, I'm not saying it's dead, but it's changing, and it's changing fast. It's understanding how you create value and create outcomes. Creating value is really how you want to price your service. The customer owns the dialogue. It's not a voice bot, it's not a chat bot, it's not a predetermined call flow that sits inside of a company. This is literally technology that allows the customer to control their own destiny.
Lone Star Ascent.AI empowers brands to turn customer interactions into immersive, multimodal experiences where AI-driven conversation becomes a product, driving loyalty, lifetime value, and scalable differentiation. Steve Deeb brings 25 years of leadership in high-tech and patented multimodal conversational AI expertise.
I've been following your stuff since the first episode, and it's fantastic. I find a lot of the material that you create and produce thought-provoking. You're doing a really great service to the community, not only different uses of the technology, but you do it in a way that creates intellectual curiosity. When you ask for something big and bold, it should scare the heck out of you. You see a vision of it, and it's like, I have no idea how to...
All right, everybody, welcome to the AI Space Podcast. AI isn't just the future, it's a force rewriting the rules of business, wealth creation, and society. If you're a founder, innovator, or technologist, this is the AI show for you. The question you have to ask yourself is, will I blaze a path, follow the crowd, or be left in the dust? This is season 2, the 7th episode, and we're thrilled to have Steve Deeb, founder and CEO of Lone Star Ascent.AI. The theme for this episode, thanks to Steve, the future of conversation is visible, seamlessly blending responsive voice and rich visuals to envelop customers in high-touch and truly immersive luxury experience. Lone Star Ascent.AI empowers brands to turn customer interactions into immersive, multimodal experiences where AI-driven conversation becomes a product, driving loyalty, lifetime value, and scalable differentiation. Steve Deeb brings 25 years of leadership in high-tech and patented multimodal conversational AI expertise. His deep knowledge in AI and natural language understanding drives the thought leadership behind emotion-rich, immersive customer experiences. Hello, everybody. I'm Sanjay Kalluvilayil, founder and CEO of Stonehouse Advisors, your trusted advisor for AI founders and businesses focused on go-to-market strategy and execution. Steve, first of all, welcome. But on the AI Space Podcast, we jump right in to highlight game-changing insights that help founders drive innovation, scale business initiatives. Once again, welcome. But what do you see as the key trends in AI?
Hey, Sanjay, thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast. I love what you're doing here. Every episode is different and unique, and I'm really happy to kind of just jump right in. So I think you asked, some key trends possibly kind of leaving 25 and going into 26. I really see a deeper fusion of voice and visuals. There's a lot, that kind of came to the forefront in 25 around multimodal conversational AI. Even like multimodality in terms of how you see vision systems and how they kind of relate with voice. And voice you saw took really center stage throughout 25. I really think multimodality and inputs and outputs are really going to drive a lot of what you see for businesses in 26. I also think small language models and running them on the edge is going to become much more prevalent in 26. We don't necessarily need all of the horsepower of the large language models for everything we do. And you saw the beginning of this in 25, and I think it's going to grow a lot more in 26, but, agents kind of taking over and running the internet headless, right? You don't necessarily need web pages for everything. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that moving forward.
Awesome. So if we look back on 2025, right, maybe what's one key insight that you're kind of taking away? Maybe surprised you or something. Hey, as I go into 2026, I should rethink this, right?
I really think, 2025, we really saw agents kind of come into their own, right? So we saw a lot of large language models and foundation models iterate. I mean, every other week there was something coming out. But I think agents, really, we kind of walked into 25, sort of testing the waters with them. I think we exit 25 with a much better understanding of how to design, how to develop, and what they do in production. You're going to see a lot more of it in 26.
Thanks a lot, Steve. some great insights. I think one of the things on an earlier episode I took from the Dan Sinowat episode was what's your story. So I think in season 2, I want to make sure the story of this podcast comes, the benefit that we're trying to drive for folks. So thanks for your insight there. What do you see as the top AI strategies to grow and scale a business?
Obviously, there's some fundamental things that you really have to consider, right? First off is really understanding the customer pain. So if you really have good problem solution fit, just as any kind of business fundamentals you should have, I mean, they're really important. So it's really, do you have a message that resonates with customers? Do you really understand what their pain points are, and can you articulate them in their language, right? So that's kind of key, right? In terms of, before you even talk about AI, that's really important. Second thing is data. So, the fidelity of data that you have and that you have available to you is going to drive the fidelity and the accuracy of whatever solution you're putting into the market, especially when we're talking about it. And the third thing is really, really important, design philosophy. So what are you trying to impart as a solution to solve that customer pain point in a way that not only resonates with the customers, but resonates in the market, and do it with really high accuracy, really low latency, and something that builds trust? So to me, those are the really fundamental things that are going to shape not only AI, but sort of the business marketplace kind of going into 26.
Yeah, no, I think to summarize what you said, I mean, a lot of things we talk about in this podcast too. It's like, are you addressing a pain point, your customer's pain point, right? Are you able to create some sort of solution and offer that addresses that pain point? You're able to deliver it in a meaningful way, right? You're able to articulate that message. But at the end, it's also about the quality, the fidelity of your data, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And then delivering that experience in a meaningful way so that it resolves a problem in a valuable way, but also it's tied to also some sort of metrics, right, that they're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, you really have to kind of communicate in customers' language. Not only do you have to understand kind of the pain they're walking through and how to solve it, but you have to communicate in their language. I mean, this is just like, sort of fundamentals 101, but, this is why AI kind of goes off course a lot of times. And you hear a lot about, AI not delivering on the ROI that was intended. It's not necessarily about the technology, right? You're not really kind of creating a science project. You're really trying to deliver something that creates value, intrinsic value in the market. So it's really understanding what that is, what resonates, and then applying technology to solve that problem.
No, that's very good. And I think also when I think about some of these AI image generations, yeah, they can pass all these benchmarks. But at the end of the day, when I put my prompt in, I don't want somebody with 3 arms or like a nose coming off their, off the side of their head or something like that, right? So, I mean, you can pass all these benchmarks, but if a nose is coming off the side of your head, that's not a good thing, right?
Definitely not. And, I chalk that up to quote unquote AI slop to a certain degree, right? So it's really like when I publish something, let's say, right, on LinkedIn, or I publish blogs or what have you, I do use AI to write some of the material. But at the end of the day, I edit and curate that material, and it's my authentic voice that gets pushed out. It's not, I just put a prompt in, I let AI generate, the material, and then I hit publish. I never do that, right? That to me is very disingenuous, and it's not an authentic voice. And that's really important, as you kind of use AI to represent your brand.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Let's take a step back. We can relax a little bit, Steve. First of all, once again, welcome. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background, what led you into this foray into AI, your path to AI?
Wow, it's a long journey. So let's say I've got about 25 years or so experience in the automotive space. Everything from voice tech in the late 90s, IVRs and all that stuff. If you remember, press 9 for this, press 5 for that. I mean, we don't hear any of that anymore, right? But that's kind of where I dipped my toe into the water. And I did a lot of, like roadside assistance, products for the automotive space. I also did embedded telematics. Was part of one of the companies that was the first sort of telematics service provider here in Irving, Texas, way back in the day. Also did a lot with machine learning and deep learning, when cloud and big data came out, say 2010 to say 2012, 2014, there was a lot of machine learning and deep learning. And that led into some usage-based insurance products and automatic crash notification with, using the accelerometers and gyros on your cell phone, fleet telematics. And so that's like a really long history that kind of talks a little bit about the voice lineage, some of the AI stuff that I got directly involved with in, say, the 2012, 2013 era. And then, leading into the transformers and generative, AI, I saw a really good opportunity to kind of take all of that tech that I was a part of, throughout my career and come up with some really new and interesting kind of technology mashups that I call multimodal conversational AI.
Very cool. And so tell us how you started Lone Star Ascent.AI and what's a role on mandate, kind of your vision.
So it's a really interesting story. So back in, after ChatGPT kind of came out, the horse left the barn. There was a ton of hype. You remember all the hysteria around OpenAI and ChatGPT, and everybody wanted to kind of, what is this? How do I use it? So I took all that technology and I removed the hype, and I found something really unique. And what I did was I took the first sort of very simple multimodal conversational AI product that I built for healthcare. And this is where I patented my technology. It was really having an open voice channel and pushing a visual experience to your phone so you could literally see the conversation unfold in front of you, and keeping those modalities contextually aware and perfectly in sync. So a user could really float between voice or gesture, on a phone, or tapping on a phone, or typing, or back to voice. It was a really kind of frictionless, cool, intuitive way to kind of create a service. And the first thing we did was we built this for the healthcare space. Major biopharmaceutical companies have to have a 1-800 drug support line for any kind of drugs that they put out in the marketplace. And we saw a really good opportunity for these big companies that were taking about 10 minutes of time to answer a customer's inquiry. And like 80% of that call was really just hold time. But they have to have a registered nurse or a pharmacist, field those calls. So it was extremely expensive. So that was the first kind of push into this, right? It was building a multimodal conversational AI to kind of address that, automate that, and reduce a ton of cost. That kind of led into a urgent care sort of emergency room sort of front end, right? So the symptom checker and, hey, where can I go get treated within a 5-mile radius of kind of where I am based on my conditions, right? That was the beginning of this in, say, 23. And then, I saw something. I was like, okay, well, this multimodal conversational AI stuff is kind of cool, but, what if you could kind of create the experience of using the product, right? So I'm kind of morphing now. I'm kind of going from like the healthcare market to, say, travel and hospitality or luxury retail, right? So I'm thinking, okay, this multimodality stuff is pretty cool. What if I could take the experience of using the product and make that part of the buying journey and create like these really cool immersive multimodal experiences that actually generate revenue and sell product instead of just, reducing cost or increasing productivity. And that's kind of where Lone Star Ascent was born.
So what's kind of like going into 2026, kind of what's your vision, role, mandate, what you're trying to achieve, target segments, use cases?
I've got a really unique set of opportunities, let's say in 26. So this product that I'm building right now is resonating extremely well in the luxury retail space. And it's the way I have it said, it's a really kind of cool tech, but it solves a fundamental business issue and drives revenue. So these companies are really kind of interested in using immersive, conversational AI, or I call it, visual conversations, because you're using both voice and visuals to create this immersive experience that drives revenue, right? So the more friction you take out, the more intuitive you make the experience, the better off the product is, the more revenue you generate, the less returns you have, the less friction you create in the customer journey, and businesses just love this.
Yeah, what's interesting, you said they're on the luxury side of things, right? There seems to be a disconnect. When you go into a luxury store, that is an immersive experience, right? There's the smell, the lights, the cabinets, the way everything's arranged, right? And then you go to the ordering or online experience, it's like complete opposite, right? And you're not treated like a luxury customer, right? So in that sense, this makes sense where you're having that immersive multimodal conversational visual experience, right?
Yeah, and I tie it into a physical store. So if you're a company that's looking for a white glove experience and something that sort of differentiates what your product offering is, and you've got people kind of browsing some really high-end jewelry, let's say, just as an example, but they abandon the cart, right? Because they don't want to buy this on a store, right? So I take that whole sort of white glove experience and use the visual conversation part of it, and I tie it into a physical location or a concierge that they might have, right, in the store that they've bought from before. So, it's a really cool way of kind of bringing or bridging that digital gap, right, to the in-store experience that you mentioned, such that it really resonates well with the customers and drives revenue.
Yeah, so typically a white glove experience is where somebody handles everything for you. Kind of like when you're moving, when you order white glove movers, they do everything for you. So in your context, from a white glove perspective, what are you handling for that retail store?
Yes, so it's actually it's kind of it's necessary complex, but I'll make it really simple. So what I do is I create sort of narrative arcs, right? So I understand what the customer intent is when they come, or whatever triggered their sort of
They saw like
interaction.
a sapphire ring or a
Yeah,
emerald earrings or whatever it's going to be, right?
yeah, they could have seen something. One of their friends might have something. They may be, maybe they're responding to like a social media, marketing campaign. Maybe they saw something, at a fashion show, whatever the case may be. There's intent in terms of why they're reaching out, and then there's context wrapped around that intent. And I decode that intent, wrap that context, and I create a narrative arc. I begin to curate a conversation like around that, right? And I infuse like brand heritage, lineage, whatever, whatever kind of depth or layering that needs to be kind of embedded in that conversation. As the conversation naturally unfolds, it's part of that. And I use a little bit of personalization, and I create a really immersive customer experience by drawing out some of the information I need to create real-time material, dynamic media if necessary, and a curated conversation that answers the customer's questions but adds depth to the experience, right? And that's really what's unique about what I'm doing.
Cool. And we'll dive deeper into that. And that kind of brings us to questions around AI, ML architecture, and tech stack. So, as you're building this out, are there any particular methodologies, frameworks you're looking at?
Well, I mean, obviously, all the hype is around, agents, and how do you leverage whatever integration framework you're using, whether it's the agent development kit or lane graph or lane chain or crew. Right? So all of that sort of underpins this, right? That kind of sits on the bottom and manages the state of the conversation, whether it's voice or visual, number one. Number two, there's a lot to be said around the fidelity of the visuals that you create and the accuracy of the voice that's either spoken or understood, right? So that's where I spend a lot of my time in terms of curating these conversations and creating depth and accuracy and fidelity in the voice and the visual. I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, Sanjay, but
Yeah, architecture, platforms, tools. So let's use it in this way. Say that a business, say that I saw like some promotion for, I'll just make something, diamond earrings or whatever, right? And I go to the website and I'm going to look for my wife. It was something for my wife, right? Luckily she's low maintenance, so that's and so, but so tell me, and then say somebody, let's just use a store, James Diamonds, ask you for your white glove service, right? So how would that work, that experience? So from, I don't want to make it too complicated, but from James' perspective on what the technology you're doing, and then what is that experience going to be looking like for me? So I go to the website, I'm looking at some earrings, and maybe I say, hey, maybe it wasn't diamond earrings. Maybe I went there for diamond earrings. I'm just gonna make something up, like some sort of emerald item, right? And I've changed intent or whatever. So maybe give me some context of how that works, right? And then
sure. So
he says, and the one thing I like what you says, like this is, you just put context in there. So that's the key thing I want to understand is how you're adding context and making that conversation flow, right?
Well, let me hit that one first, and we'll talk a little bit about the jeweler example. So context is really twofold. First off, the customer owns the dialogue. It's not a voice bot. It's not a chat bot. It's not a predetermined call flow that sits inside of a company. This is literally technology that allows the customer to control their own destiny. They ask the questions, right? They're there for a reason, and they want that reason addressed, right? And usually it's quick, but in some cases, it's sure what they want. So it's sort of a discovery. So I take the psychology that's behind their intent and I use that to ask some questions. So I let them ask a question, I answer the question, and then sometimes I'll ask a question to draw out some more context from the customer, right, to build this experience and build the conversation. So that's literally how the narrative arcs are created, right? And then, the jewelry example is a great one. So, a lot of the, jewelers, the custom, shops, you can go in and design an engagement ring or design a pair of earrings or just, right? There's a lot you can do with, let's call it design or configuring the product that you want. Pick the grade of diamond, you pick the grade of emerald, you pick the setting, the shape of the ring. Like all of that is really, really important. You need a sort of a design expert, right, there to kind of answer questions for the customer. But what if you could just do that online? So let's say, you want to buy an engagement ring or a really nice set of earrings, or you want to buy a watch and you want to have it engraved and personalized, right? You can do a lot of the discovery work. You can find the products, the materials, the colors that kind of mix or match with what you want. And you can do this in a very conversational, visually compelling way up front, and then literally go in the store and finish off the design and see exactly what it is that you've configured or purchased before they actually go and kind of build it, right? Size it exactly to your finger as an example.
Or making the trade-offs on the multiple C's in there, right? Maybe like, okay, maybe if somebody doesn't know what clarity is, can they ask, hey, I don't understand clarity, and what is the trade-off when it's slightly yellow versus more clear, right? Those types of things. Is that something they can do?
Absolutely. This is fully conversational. So, as long as, in this particular case, it's about jewelry, right? So, you can ask anything about the piece you're designing, right? The stone or, the cut, and clarity of the stone, like what the certain ratings mean. You can ask questions and it's just a conversation. Just like you and I are having a conversation right now. It literally works the same way. And I push visuals to your phone or, to the web page, depending on how you're interacting with this. So it's literally you're speaking, you're seeing, you're speaking, you're asking, you're seeing, and it's a really cool way to kind of manage that experience digitally and bridge that gap between what you see digitally and what you get in the store.
Right. Or maybe, is there a way to tie it in? I'm just asking, so I'm asking random stuff, so sorry about that. But like, say that they saw it at an award show or the Met Gala, or somebody wearing this kind of a similar type thing, right? Can they search on that or ask, hey, or
take a picture and feed it in? That's the multimodality of it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And so say that I get to the end and I put in the cart and I'm thinking about it and I abandon the cart. What does that look like after that?
Well, so there's a couple of things that happen, right? So the technology that I'm developing is really kind of geared to not abandoning the cart, right? So what I'm trying to do is create an experience that is so bespoke and answers questions so directly, especially if the intent is categorized as high, that you're closing and generating revenue as part of this engaging experience. That's part one. Part two is if there is an abandoned cart, right, or there isn't a kind of let's call it a bridge to a physical in-store location, or you go and kind of set an appointment to finish off whatever custom jewelry that you're putting together, right? So the intent is to set that meeting up, get all of the details kind of put away so that when you go into the store and speak with the designer, it's more of a sort of it's a human to human. It's more of a like a high touch, kind of conversation, as opposed to, okay, I need you to figure out like what cut you want, what setting you like. None of all that is all kind of, they get the ability to kind of go through the discovery process themselves. All that is kind of done. And when you get in, it's much more of a personal connection in the store.
Yeah. And is there, I guess, when you, especially that intent portion, where you find a certain where people are about to abandon, and if this is probably the best moment if you connect to a person in the store, hey, would you like to talk to the head jeweler or the designer at the store and they're available right now? Or what you could probably do is, I'm not sure if you have this, but put a calendar link in there for like set up they're available at 4 p.m. this afternoon, right? And you can book a 15-minute slot just to, instead of like an hour, but just to see if they're legit,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's literally was part of like the urgent care front end of the medical thing that I built.
Right? Oh yeah, especially. Yeah, okay, that's
so scheduling and passing all that information off, or transferring the call if that's really what's needed. Like, it's really all about what the customer wants to do. If they're feeling pressured, that's kind of where you back off a little bit, right? And set an appointment. If they're really high intent, that's where you bridge the gap into the physical store and soft transfer or warm transfer a call in.
Yeah, I think that's what I liked about the care now model. Instead of sitting in an emergency room for 3 hours, you could actually try to book a time. They'll call you 30 minutes before.
Yeah, and it's like when you get in there, you have to fill out like 20 pages on a clipboard, right? Like, why, right? You could just literally, talk your way through that. All that information's kind of gathered just as part of the conversation. And if there's maybe 3 or 4 things that are missed in the conversation at the tail end, it'll ask. It'll reach back out and say, hey, we need to know this, and this, please. And it's all done.
So is your model like a fixed fee model, or is there like a commission base if a revenue comes out of a sale comes out of somebody buying the diamond? How does that work?
Yes. So the way I try to keep it extremely simple, it's really a percentage of value created. So if we're creating value with this bespoke service, which we are, it's really a percentage of value created. And the companies that are piloting this and kind of using it are seeing a really good sort of push high end, right? So they're getting a lot of value out of using this. And the value that I create, I just take a small percentage of. And it's a very, very simple arrangement to do it that way.
Okay, very cool. So in terms of some of the underlying technologies that you're using, some of the visual, I'm sure you're using some Gen AI and,
Of course.
all the stuff. So where do you see 2026? What are some of how do you see it evolving?
Yeah, so obviously voice accuracy, sample rate is going through the roof right now. So I personally, high accuracy and low latency, you've got to make some trade-offs with voice quality, right? So, sample rates and things like that are really, really important in terms of what I do. Noise cancellation and, VAD. So, hearing pauses and long pauses and stopping, right? The voice stream. So I use a lot of streaming in what I do. I don't wait for, the whole audio session or that part of the dialogue to stop and then I kind of do my thing. I stream everything in real time to make it much more engaging, right? It feels a lot more like a regular conversation like you and I are having right now if you do it right. I see a lot of like technology, voice technology in particular, being significantly improved in 26. We saw a lot of activity in 25. I think it's going to increase exponentially in 26. You're going to see a lot of other companies kind of come out with voice simulating voice and creating other sort of voices that are much more acoustically tuned and emotionally coherent with what's happening in the conversation. That to me is what's going to happen in 26.
Yeah, so I know some people are familiar with the companies like 11 Labs where you can train your voice and they can generate and you can use it for other import it like the HeyGen and do these AI avatars, right? So so help our audience understand. So say I give a sample of my voice, right? I think for 11 Labs, you got to give quite a couple of hours of samples, right? For them to train a sample of your voice of different things that you've done. And you probably have to have different, enunciate a certain way and do certain things, right? So to generate that voice later, there's some sort of sample rate, right? And so are they converting that to text at some point and then doing some sort of...
So the easiest, I'll make this really, really easy. So the easiest way to think about this is with large language models, right? There's the transformer logic. It's an encoder and a decoder, right? So basically, you're taking speech, converting it to text, doing its thing, right? And then you're kind of kicking it back out as text. And then, like companies like mine or 11 Labs use the text to speech, right, to generate audio back out of that. That's typically how a large language model works. What 11 Labs is doing is a very similar thing, right? So they're taking voice samples, but they're looking at acoustics and acoustic properties. So I was kind of mentioning things like emotional coherence, or when you're converting or transcribing between languages, there are certain pauses and things or inflection points in the language as you're speaking that are really important, that add to the fidelity of the conversation. So 11 Labs has a transformer, let's call it, that kind of understands the acoustics and the subtleties of language. And then they take that and they output a WAV file, or they output, something that is audible as opposed to generating text like you see with a large language model. And that's the essence of how it's done.
Yeah, and I think the important part there is versus having a monotone. If I created, "Hi, this is the AI Space Podcast," right? Because to make it energetic, and you have to have inflection points, you have to pronounce things a certain way. So 11 Labs and others, there's the text to speech, but there's like you said, the acoustics, the flavors, the acoustics, the different waveforms, the inflection, the pronunciation, all that fine tuning that needs to be done, right, to make, I think, 2026 and beyond, the voice a little bit more realistic, right? In terms of, because sometimes you can still tell, when things are a bit AI,
Yeah. So how you manage, the voice and in that particular context, to me, like where I see a lot of hyper personalization going, right, is around understanding the customer. So getting the inflection of how the customer is speaking as I'm streaming that audio in, and then kind of decoupling that, right? So there's intent and there's context that you grab from that, but really understanding the nuance of the conversation and then using that nuance of the conversation based on how the customer is speaking and having the agent respond to that in the same sort of coherence that the user is kind of speaking, right? So it sounds like a really natural kind of conversation as opposed to somebody speaking, very quick and high density, and then having the agent kind of respond with a very kind of slow, methodical, right? So you really need to kind of understand that stream and be able to pull a lot of nuance out of that stream to create a voice that kind of is immersive and draws people in. And you begin to like forget about time. You forget about friction. You're just having a conversation, right? And part of this that we haven't really talked about is the immersive visuals that are created, right? Either with digital assets that are already there.
Explain that a bit. Yeah. So are you creating images, videos? What are you creating?
Everything, right? So think of it this way. You hear an audio clip of somebody biting into an apple. You just hear that, crunch. Immediately your mind thinks apple. You're seeing in your mind an apple, right? So there's a bunch of ways to stage like audio clips or visuals, right? Based on how the conversation's going. So you can kind of use an audio clip to set an image in your mind. You can take a sort of a digital asset and use, let's say like Imagen as an example, to kind of augment that digital asset based on what's happening in the conversation, right? Or you can create like a 2 or 3 second video clip that's generated from that turn in the dialogue of the conversation. So you're seeing like a lot of what you're speaking in front of you, and it's used, so you're asking a question, you're hearing the agent speak back to you, you're seeing all this stuff, and based on what you're hearing and seeing, it's really diving deeper into the conversation. You get kind of pulled in. That's the immersive part of the experience.
And this is probably a little bit tongue in cheek in a sense, but but it's important, right? Because there's some agentic part to it. So when the customer is irate, right, it says they're upset, I want to speak to a human, not an agent, or whatever, and you don't get the other side responding in kind and escalating. How do you manage that? I'm sure there's multiple policies in place, other things to make sure the agent can de-escalate that situation, right?
Yeah. Usually situations or scenarios like that are much more on the customer support side. So that's usually most post-purchase, right? I got a product that didn't work right, or my bill's not right, or I need to speak to some, right? So I do a lot of that, right? And that's kind of where you need a in the loop, especially when somebody's, irate and, you want to make sure that you turn a bad situation into good. So, usually kind of prepping the call and then getting a human in the loop to close that is really, really important, right? So being able to collect some data, the intent and the context I was talking about, and then warm transfer that into a human is kind of the way you want to handle those scenarios. What I typically do though is I'm focused in the market, like on the revenue generating side, more so than I am on the customer support side. There's a ton of companies that are really in the customer support space, right? It's all about agent co-pilots, increasing productivity of the contact center agents, right? Decreasing cost. That's all great. I mean, I can certainly do that with my tech, but what I'm focused on is increasing revenue, increasing brand loyalty, right? And driving really like brand immersive conversations that keep customers coming back. That's kind of where I focus my tech on.
Yeah, no, that's good. Because there are situations where I've called a company and they're like, "Hi, this is Adam, your AI agent," and you can't get out of the loop, and you get a little bit upset. But what I'm saying is, in your context, say it's going really well, the conversation, but at some point they're like, "Hey, I really want." Basically, they're saying, "I really want to talk to somebody," and that's when you would connect them to a person, the human in the loop, or set up a meeting, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is a white glove service that I'm building. So if that's literally what they want, that's what they get.
Awesome. Let's shift gears a little bit. What about the AI Space podcast resonate with you and say, "Hey, I'd like to be a guest on the show"?
I've been following your stuff since the first episode, and it's fantastic. I find a lot of the material that you create and produce, you're doing a really great service to the community, highlighting certain areas and technologies and different, uses of the technology, but you do it in a way that creates intellectual curiosity, and I certainly love that.
No, I appreciate you. Yeah, definitely from day one. When you first start out, there aren't a lot of two people engaging with your posts, especially on LinkedIn. You've been consistent, and then it's kind of funny. It's like I think we kind of interacted online, then we finally met at a networking event and hit it off really well. Then I think I was going down to Austin for an event and told you about it. You went down, and we've been staying in touch. And yeah, no, and it's now the season 2 starting. I'm so excited that you're on here. I think it's perfect timing because, like I said, I want to have a variety of levels of folks. I've had big companies, bootstrappers, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs. But, like this topic that we're talking about, I don't think we've covered this type of topic per se, or in the depth that we're talking to on a previous episode. So thank you for coming out here because, the reason I started the show over a year ago, was I was figuring out this AI space and someone said, "Hey, you should start a podcast." I said, "What should I do about it?" I said, "Hey, why don't I give back?" And I'm sure other people trying to figure out this space. Let's talk to other founders, technologists, builders that are actually building this space to share insights, share their journey, and share, hey, what's successful and, how's this space evolving and build this community, right? So thank you for sharing in that.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure. Happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, everybody, before we continue, I want to invite everyone to follow Steve Deeb. Steve, where's the best place for people to follow you, get connected with you?
I guess on LinkedIn is probably the best place. Either that or the website, right?
So, a lot of folks focus only on the technology side. We want to make sure we're holistic on this podcast. So from a vision, mindset, strategy perspective, what do you see as the key insights for long-term success?
Well, it's really understanding what your vision is and who gave it to you, right? For starters, I get up every morning and I ask God for help with everything I'm doing, prioritizing my work, guiding my steps, blessing, the works I've done. So to me, that is like paramount in everything I do. And it leads you to never give up, right? Stay focused, stay grounded, stay real, and never, ever give up. I think, that's the really grounding factor and driving factor behind what I'm doing.
No, I think that's a very, very powerful insight too, because I'll be honest, a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we're like, "Oh, I have all this talent, I have all the experience, I'll get it done myself." And that's the key word, myself, right? And then, as soon as you hit challenges, etc. I've learned in the past year or two, to be more spiritually grounded, trust in God, and to humble myself a little bit too. And realize, and not to put, and the other thing is when you humble yourself too, you don't put too much on yourself and stress yourself out because that leads to burnout. Because you think, okay, I got to do everything myself, I got to figure it out myself. It's going to lead to a dark place, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. So if you get too kind of hyper focused on any one thing, you'll get burnt out, number one. And number two, you can't do it yourself. Right? You really need help. The way I kind of approach it is, I ask for big, bold things and I ask for daily guidance and how I get, right? And I trust his plan, and I ask for, daily steps, guide my steps every day, trust in his plan, ask for big, bold things and, sit back and not sit back necessarily, but, don't get too hyper focused on one thing and rely completely on yourself. If you're getting stuck, take a step back, reset yourself, reground, find what you can be grateful for, and then re-engage.
I think one of the hardest things too, I think as any entrepreneur, anybody, right? You have a vision or dream for yourself. Sometimes you've seen that dream, right? It's like a flash. It's something out there. The hardest part is you don't know. You're like, okay, is that real or is that, going back to the source, was that a divine thing or something else, right? But then you have to think, but the hardest part is like, sometimes you can only see 3 steps ahead of you the max, right? But you saw this out here, and you think you can have everything else here, but you can only see max. And sometimes you don't even see 3 steps. Maybe you see 0 steps, but you got to take that first step, right? You got to do something. So what's it? So you have that, right? Then how do you move forward? Because I think dreams and visions are good, but if you're not taking action, if you're not executing on it on a daily basis and focusing on the right results, it's going to be a tough road, right?
Yeah, so I see that as faith, right? So faith is a muscle just like any other muscle in your body that needs to be exercised every day. When you ask for something big and bold, it should scare the heck out of you. You see a vision of it and it's like, I have no idea how to get there or what to do. But by faith and by asking to guide your steps every day, right, you're getting the breadcrumbs you need in order to fulfill that goal. And sooner or later you get there, right? But it's by faith and by guiding, letting him guide you is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and part of that faith is you actually have to take the steps, right? You actually have to move forward. Yeah, you may fall down, you may take 3 steps back, but sometimes that 3 steps back is helping you to recircle, redo things. Sometimes when I do a lot of work and then the system crashes and I have to start all over, sometimes I take it as okay, maybe whatever I wrote earlier wasn't that great or I was in the wrong direction. So I start afresh, and try to go with a positive attitude. Maybe it crashed for a reason. Besides, you got to save, of course, but
So here's a great one. Cup is half full, right? So I always look at it as the cup is half full and it's filling up, as opposed to the cup is half full and it's draining out, right? So it's more of a mindset and finding the silver lining in the cloud, right? Whatever your set of circumstances are, there's always something good to take from it. And if you can find that, the cup is always half full and it's filling up.
Yep. And hopefully runneth over, right?
That's a separate problem, man.
So speaking of running, my cup runneth over. So from a sales and marketing perspective, what insights can you share on getting your first clients and expanding your clientele, right?
Well, so this is an interesting one because in the age of AI, it's kind of, things are shifting underneath our feet and some people see it and some people don't. But the SaaS business model, I'm not saying it's dead, but it's changing and it's changing fast. And what's driving that change is unit economics, right? So where SaaS used to be like, daily average users, monthly average users, right? Cost per customer acquired, lifetime value of the customer and things like that, right? And kind of, generating revenue by head count or by seat, things of that nature. This is with kind of what we're doing with AI, it's a little different. It's like inference costs per customer is really, really important, right? So to understand your unit costs and how much your service is costing to produce is really important. And then the other side of it is, like I talked a little bit about it earlier, it's understanding how you create value and create outcomes. Creating value is really how you want to price your service. So, there's usually a lot more value for solving a customer pain point than the cost of kind of producing that service, right? And in the age of AI, you really have to understand what your unit economics are and that spread is in order to be successful. And I think moving forward in 26, we're going to see a lot more businesses that get created be valued that way.
So I think it's interesting also, even though we're talking about sales and marketing, understand, because at the end it's about profitability, right? And understanding your unit economics. I talked about this on a previous episode with Victor Fong in terms of the way LLMs work and the whole embedding process, right? So you have, when you're doing embedding, and especially on the pre-training, right? It's a n squared. So if you have n tokens, it's n squared computation. So every time you double, that's a quadratic scaling, right? And so in your case, you're doing voice, text, images, all that kind of stuff. So you have to have a pretty good command of your unit economics, because a lot of these providers that are out there that are providing these services, they're losing money by even on their subscriptions, right? Because they have venture capital funding for the long-term game, right? But for small solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, you can't play that same game, right?
No, you can't, right? And that's why it's really, really important. So, there's a couple of ways of looking at this, depending on what phase of growth your business is in. If you're pre-revenue and bootstrapping, then a lot of what you do is open source, and you do a lot of it, right, for as low cost as possible, and you spend a lot of intellectual capital on sort of tuning, right, for low latency and high accuracy. there's a lot of custom code that has to go in to understand how to build right at low unit economic cost when you're bootstrapping or you're pre-revenue. When you're in expansive growth, then it becomes a little different, and it's more around the personas you're serving and the value that you're creating within each persona, right? So just like marketing campaigns are targeted by segment, right, the services have to be targeted by segment, right? And in some cases, like a high value segment, you can afford a higher unit economic cost because the value you're creating and the revenue you're driving is much, much higher, right? So all of these things are like tuning, like the service that I talked about earlier in terms of accuracy and latency, and coming up with a really high fidelity service. That's one thing, but it's also about tuning the business to who you're serving too, right? And you have to be mindful of making those two things mate with one another to create a good revenue stream.
Yeah, I think that's also a good transition too. Once you figure that out, in a sense, right? What do you see insights for like streamlining operations and scaling the business to the next level?
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about with like inference costs and sort of understanding who you're targeting, right? So not only like I'm not talking about just ICPs and resonating with customers here. I'm talking about like refining segments of personas that you target in a business that's your customers, right? So I'm in a B2B to C model. So
Business to business to consumer, right?
yeah, so I serve businesses that serve customers. So I'm representing, my client's brand as I interact with their customers, right? So I have to be extremely mindful of what their brand and their brand strategy is as I develop services for them, because really what I'm doing is kind of I'm creating a service of their product, right? And my service has to represent their product and their brand identity and all the micro interactions that I do. So when I talk about like, segmenting customers, that's literally how granular I'm thinking about this in order to create the upside profitability and the revenue, right, per those segments for those customers.
Right, because people forget sometimes too when people think, well, why do you pay so much for a brand, right? But brand, like when you say any brand, whether it's Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Louis Vuitton, Target or Walmart, whatever, you have in your mind a certain reputation, experience, quality, price. Those are all factors. And as you are mindful of your customer, which is a business, that their brand and the experience that they promise to deliver to their customers, right? And that needs to be in line. So it can't be different than the way that they're. So when you have an immersive experience, it should be consistent and enhance their current brand or experience, right?
Yeah, so Apple and Google are really two great examples of this, right? So Apple, you look at anything Apple, and it's really a clean design, right? There's a lot of there's no cognitive overload. There's a lot of clean lines. I don't want to say plain because it's still
It's
a
more.
very
It's like they focus on the aesthetic and the.
there you go. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So they do a really good job of that, right? So when you're designing a service, right, for a company that has a brand strategy like that, you really have to design that into how you handle each one of those interactions, right? Or how a customer engaged. On like Google does a great job because if you look at all of their services, right, like Docs, Google Meet, email, like all of the sort of the products that they create, they all have that same kind of brand identity. You look at those icons and you realize immediately that it's Google, right? So they do a really good way, a good job of creating sort of product differentiation underneath a really good solid brand umbrella. So when you're designing services that interact with their customers, as an example, I'm not saying I'm working with Google or Apple or anything like that, but when I'm working with a business, I have to understand sort of the brand architecture and how they represent and resonate through their products with their customers in order for me to create an experience that embodies that brand and drives loyalty. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yep. No, that's great. AI is a great democratizer, but what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities to making AI accessible to founders and businesses from a variety of industries, experiences, backgrounds? How can we bridge this gap?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So obviously, let's take a different track here completely. Let's talk about education just for a second,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's part of it.
Yeah, like education, not only from like students in college, in STEM, graduates, but education of people, within an enterprise right now. So, you hear a lot of buzz, around AI kind of stealing jobs and, the disintermediation of like white collar jobs and all of this stuff. I think that's a lot of hype, just like, Gen AI was when it first kind of came out. Yeah, there's a lot of smoke, and there's some fire there where there's smoke. But if you really kind of take a closer look at it, regardless if you're a student or a mid-career professional, it's really understanding the skills gap, right? And understanding the cultural alignment that an employee has within an organization. So when I say skills gap, AI is out there now, and a lot of people. I'm going to say something really dumb that everybody says, but AI is not going to steal your job, but somebody using AI is. And frankly, it's really in an enterprise. It's really understanding what that skills gap is. Who's AI literate? Who's not? How do you get them to be AI literate? Are they in the right job to begin with? Maybe an engineer should be a sales rep, right? So you really have to understand kind of what that skills gap is as AI influences everything that's happening within the enterprise. You also have to understand how culturally aligned are the employees in your organization and your team. So it's a combination of the skills gap and cultural alignment that really is part of the drive democratization of AI in the enterprise and even in colleges and education, right? Because those are the folks that are getting ready to enter in the workforce, right? They have to be cognizant of this too.
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's very powerful insight. It's about the focus on the skills gap and really the skills that are going for us to survive, right? So I transitioned to AI. Well, next year when 26, I'll be 53. So I was 50 when I transitioned to AI because I saw the future. I was like, I don't want to be in this corporate cycle. I see layoffs coming. There's going to be a different set of skills required. I started my own AI consulting business. Have this podcast now, right? All new stuff, but it's kind of interesting. The podcast has made me use so many different AI skills in terms of thumbnail design, title design, keyword, SEO, image generation, text to speech. I mean, you name it. I've probably tested a lot of different things on this podcast, learning the concepts, reading white papers, all this stuff, and hopefully I'll get to writing the AI book. But there is when we transition from stagecoaches to automobiles, right? The guys that followed the horses and cleaned up after them lost their jobs, right? I don't want to treat
Oh,
it
they became the factory workers, actually, right? You
as
think about it. They became the factory workers.
and then you get into the internet age with the Microsoft, Word, everything else, right? Excel, etc. A different set of skill sets were required. Right now, you have to do like pivot tables and you know other Visual Basic if you need to get into that, or Solver, etc. Right? Or PowerPoint. And now with the then Google Sheets have their stuff, and now with the AI tools out there, there's so many things that you have to figure out. SEO now becoming GEO, generative, engine optimization, because now all the people are searching more in ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, etc. Right? So the dynamics is changing. And before I was like, wow, it's going way too fast, and there's too much to learn. But if someone right now is listening and you haven't jumped in, it's still a good time to jump in and figure this out. There's still so many
Oh,
opportunities out there. Right?
yeah, we're in the infancy of this whole kind of revolution. If you haven't jumped in, jump in. I mean, you haven't really, you've missed a lot, but you haven't missed much in the grander scheme of things, right? And it is an interesting. So you brought up SEO versus GEO, and it's more. What's interesting here is the divide between keyword searching and searching by semantic relevance, right? They're both really good, but semantic relevance is going to be a lot more nuanced, and that's kind of where we're headed, right? So you can kind of see the paths kind of diverging a little bit, and to take advantage of GEO, it's really about your content, and that's why I said I use AI to generate content, but I edit and finalize it all, with my own sort of thoughts, my own words, because I'm really trying to develop a way of creating content that is GEO compliant as opposed to just SEO.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how the GEO works too. I'll give you an example. I was looking up I was doing a submission for something for my podcast, and I looked at my podcast on SEO or Google and just pulled up the links or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Then I went to, I think it was like Perplexity and ChatGPT, and asked about my podcast. It didn't really pop up. I said, okay, what about the new podcast about like this one? Then it actually said some really nice things about my podcast and stuff. Then it said, oh, but it's very business focused and less technology. And I said, well, there are quite a few episodes in there where technology where we deep dove. Oh, you're absolutely right. And then they updated, and then they assessed me versus some other podcasts and said, yeah, well, it's not the level of this podcast. I'm like, how old is that podcast? It's like multi-years old. I said, okay, now assess my podcast in relation for a 1-year-old podcast based on the stats, the views, and subscribers, and like, oh, wow, you're doing extremely well. Okay. It was kind of cool to have that interaction versus you can't do that in an SEO environment. And I can go in back and forth and ask about, okay, how do you honestly assess this podcast? So, which is pretty cool,
Yeah, and it's doing it based on, semantic relevance of what you produced in your podcast.
Yeah.
That's the cool part of it, right? It's not, hey, like I want to have this hashtag and search on this hashtag. It's literally going through the corpus that you've created and finding semantically relevant responses to your questions.
Well, it also means that they've been scraping my podcast, everyone's podcast too. Because they can say episode, this one they talked about, LLMs and embedding. It's okay, yeah. I'm sure you just found that out right now. Not. So, ethical and responsible. How do we balance AI innovation with responsible development?
Oh, okay. Actually, this one, let's take a sort of like we did with the last one. Let's take a different kind of turn. I really think this is going to become paramount when quantum computing becomes a little bit more mainstream than it is now, right? And I think, ethics and sort of understanding sort of where we are, as we're everybody is so concerned around bias, right? And ethical AI and, the risks associated to legal compliance with AI. And I mean, we're in the infancy of what all this is going to kind of transform into. I really think, how we get this right or wrong now is going to be amplified and exponentially expanded when we start looking at, quantum processing. And let me give you an example. So you toss a coin, right? A coin has heads, tails, and arguably it's got a side, but I don't think I've ever seen a coin land on its side, right? So it's either heads or tails. But in the process of the toss, it could be either heads or tails, and it could flip between, those two states or even the third state on its side a multitude of times. None of that's really important in terms of how we look at it now. But when quantum computing comes online, all of those possible states within that time series of events is going to be part of what's computed. It's going to be part of the what if scenarios and the analysis that kind of unfolds in front of us. I really think, the ethics and how we handle a lot more complexity coming at us is going to be really, really important, kind of moving forward. So as much as we debate and as much friction as there is now about risks, legal compliance, ethics, I think it's going to be a lot more important kind of moving forward. And, I don't think really we're going to get to that point for, say, another at least like 3 to 5 years on the aggressive side of things. It's not like it's going to come out in 26, but I think we're kind of moving there pretty quickly if you look at how much technology has been coming at us over the past 2 years.
No, I think, yeah, especially on the quantum state, yeah, they live in multiple states at one time, right? I forgot the term now. I'm going blank. Is it qubits? No, not qubits.
Yeah, qubits. That's right.
Yeah. That's going to be interesting too. And I said originally why I started the show, but I'm realizing too after the last couple of episodes we've talked about using living neurons for AI processing. We talked about AI agents and the coming. If 80% of the jobs are gone, what does that do to humanity? So I've talked about in the last couple of episodes. A lot of these things have come up. Some of the utopian scenarios, the dystopian scenarios, and like you said, I think we have to get a grip of this now because if we're slightly off now, that's okay. But if I'm headed toward Seattle and I'm off a little bit, I could end up in Baja California, right? And so I think part of the show too, I'm realizing is, to make people aware of the risks that are coming down the road and how can we be prepared, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I really, I think the fundamental thing is there's so much changing right now in a short amount of time, right? So if you think about like the Industrial Revolution, you talked about that a few minutes ago and how long it took, right? And how kind of slow and methodical, like, all of the mechanical things that had to get put in place in order to create the assembly line in the factories, right? It took time to build all that stuff. What we're going through now, there's no like building. I mean, there is this, it's software, right? But the time to market is so compressed now. We're iterating on things so quickly. There's no like time to build a factory, time to build a, an assembly line. It's literally software that we're kind of iterating on, and that's why it's
And you can
coming.
and you can spin up in the virtual environment, you know.
Yeah, it's coming. That's why it's coming so fast, right? And it just everybody, myself included, it's like, oh my God, I got to learn like all of this. Like every day, there's something that's being announced or released, right? And you really have to focus on what your sweet spot is in order to kind of figure out what signal from noise is for you or for the business that you're in. I think that is going to keep on getting faster and faster and faster. And there's going to be more technology that kind of comes in, and the ability to separate signal from noise and understand, where you fit into this, how you create value is really going to be how uniqueness, of everybody, you, myself included, this is going to be kind of where we as humans add value into the creation process, right? So machines can only do so much. It's really, okay, they're going to automate a lot of like, the things that people did or do, but it's going to create the ability for us to kind of leverage that automation and create, find what's really resonant and important about what we do and how we create. That's going to be like the next level. I think that's kind of where things are going. And I know I'm getting a little philosophical here, and I kind
Well,
of apologize.
this is the philosophical section, so which is good.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm a philosopher undercover sometimes too. So the interesting thing too is like about value and impact too. And yeah, like you said, there's too many things coming out. You can't. I don't have 3 hours, 8 hours to go learn every single thing each time. So I've said on the last couple episodes, what I do now, I call, some people talk about playing. I call it snacking, where like say a new tool comes out, or whatever, and I'm trying to solve a business problem, and then I'll go spend 15 minutes, 5, 10, 15 minutes, maybe even an hour if necessary. Can that tool or that whatever help me solve this particular business problem, right? So I'm very laser focused. And, that's probably a good way of trying to figure out, do some of these tools, can they benefit you, and trying to figure out, every single nuance of everything. I don't have the time, especially if you.
Yeah. So the way I look at it is, you figure out what you're trying to solve, the problem you're trying to solve. You find a tool, either one in your toolkit already, or like a new one if you don't think you have one in your toolkit that solves the problem. And then you figure out how to create value. You solve that problem, and then as new tools kind of come out or competitive products come out, yeah, that's all fine and good. But unless there's something that creates value in this new product, you stick with what you have, right? Because unless there's something that really, you need to kind of take advantage of, you've already solved the problem. You're already creating value. You kind of move on to the next thing. That's
Yep.
the way I look at it.
I agree. Um, any final concluding thoughts, insights, encouragement seeking for those seeking to get in this space or struggling to build their business?
Just continue to do what you do. Like stay focused, never give up, and seek out information and podcasts like this one, Sanjay. I think you've done a fantastic job of curating like different, people to have on your podcast, different topics. And I would just say, continue to do what you're doing, continue to spread the word. And for people that really need a good kind of grounding, this is a really good way of kind of getting into the foray here. Right. I think you're doing a great job.
No, I truly appreciate that, sir. And then the other thing too, I think going back to what you said earlier too, having that faith, take the steps each day, right? And we talk about this too. If you stumble and fall, it's okay. Get back up, regroup. I actually even thought, I'm going to work next week. I actually been burnt out. I realized the other day I'm pretty burnt out. It's been a long year, especially getting this podcast and everything. I said, you know what? Maybe I should take some time off next week. It's Christmas week. Maybe I should actually, instead of having 52 episodes for season 2, maybe I'll just do 50 episodes, right? And actually take time to spend with the family, and also give me a little bit of a lead time for the next episode to come out instead of having to race and get everything edited too. So it's about finding that balance,
It totally is. And, taking that time actually, is really around reflection and gratitude, right? So, you get really kind of hyper focused and burnt out on things. But if you actually take a step back and look kind of where you just came from over the past 12 months, right? and reflect on all that has happened, I guarantee you'll be extremely grateful from where you started the year and based on where you finished the year. And it's so important to do that. I mean, to get, a little biblical here just for a second, God created, the world and the universe in the first 6 days, and then he took the seventh day off, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take the seventh day off. What it means is you have to respect what he did, that philosophy of do, and then take a break, reflect on where you've come from, be grateful for where you are, and then dig back in again. I think that's really important.
No, that's amazing. I think for everybody out there, I think the action item too is take a step back, think about where you were 1 year ago in terms of your progress. And there may be some bad things that may have happened, the health things, whatever, but if you've been progressing in your business, think how much you've accomplished. And is it obviously it's never as much as you wanted, right? But that's not the point, because not everything that you wanted is what you needed, right? Because there's some lessons you had to learn along the way. So find those points of gratitude. No, that's awesome. Steve, we can talk all day about the future of the AI space and philosophical and biblical things, right? We're coming up on time, but for our listeners, where's the best place for folks to learn more about you or connect with you?
I'd say Lone Star Ascent.AI, the website. There's a lot of material there about what I do, who I am. There's a way to connect with me there or on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Either way.
We'll have everything up. Fantastic. Everyone make sure to check out and connect with Steve. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and find us on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple. Steve, I learned a lot from this episode, had a lot of fun. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you so much. I'm your host, Sanjay Kalluvilayil, founder and CEO of Stonehouse Advisors. I hope you gained a wealth of game-changing real-world insights to grow, transform, and scale to new levels and dimensions leveraging AI. See you all next time. Thanks so much. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Sanjay. Really appreciate it.